They say blood is thicker than water, but in my family, blood is just a currency used to buy loyalty for the golden child. I spent 5 years building my sanctuary from the ground up, stone by stone, while they watched from the sidelines. But when my brother's wedding bells started ringing, my parents didn't just want an invitation, they wanted the keys to my life. They thought they could auction off my hard work to save face, but they forgot one thing. I learned my best moves from the man who built the empire they're all currently leeching off of. My grandfather was watching, and he wasn't about to let them rewrite my story. Rain was drumming against the window of my study, a steady, rhythmic sound that usually brought me peace. But today, the atmosphere inside the house felt heavy, like the air right before a massive storm breaks. I'm Lily Rose, and for most of my life, I was the reliable one. In my family, reliable is just a polite way of saying the person who gets ignored until something needs to be fixed or paid for. I stared at the deed on my desk. The guest house. It wasn't just a building, it was my independence. It was a stunning, 3-story architectural gem nestled on the edge of our family estate, overlooking the valley. I had spent my inheritance and every cent of my savings to renovate it into a high-end boutique stay. It was my business, my soul, and my future. Then came the knock on the door. My mother walked in wearing that specific smile she only uses when she's about to ask for a small favor that ends up costing me my sanity. Behind her stood my father, looking solemn, as if he were carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Lily Rose, darling," my mother started, smoothing out an invisible wrinkle in her silk dress. "We've been looking at the guest list for your brother's wedding. It's expanded. Leo is marrying into a very prestigious family, you know that." I kept my pen moving across the paper. "I'm aware, Mom. It's the event of the season." "The thing is," my father chimed in, his voice gruff, "the hotels in town aren't up to the standards of the bride's parents. We need a place for the inner circle, a place that reflects our family status." I finally looked up. I knew where this was going, but I wanted them to say it. "And we think it's only fair that you vacate the guest house for the month of the wedding," Mother said, her voice turning sharp, losing the fake sweetness. "In fact, we've already told the bride's father that the estate's private villa, your house, would be at their disposal. It's for the family, Lily. Don't be selfish." Selfish. The word tasted like ash. I had funded Leo's car. I had stayed behind to care for the estate while they traveled. And now they wanted to hand over my home and my business assets to a group of strangers for a month, effectively shutting down my bookings and ruining my reputation. "It's not a villa, Mom. It's my home, and it's a registered business with paying guests booked for those dates," I said, calmly. My father slammed his hand on the desk. "Cancel them. This is your brother's big day. Do you want him to look like a beggar in front of his in-laws? You'll move into your old bedroom in the main house. It's settled." They walked out before I could even say no. They truly believed that because they gave me the land that belonged to my grandfather, not them, they owned my life. But as I sat there in the dim light, my phone buzzed. It was a message from the one person who actually saw me, my grandfather, the patriarch who had retreated to his mountain cabin years ago to escape my parents' greed. The message was simple. "I heard the vultures are circling the valley. Don't sign anything. I'm coming down for the rehearsal dinner." I felt a cold smile spread across my face. My parents thought they were playing a game of checkers. They didn't realize grandfather had already won the chess match 30 years ago. By the way, I'd love to know where and at what time you are watching this video. Let me know in the comments below. The following week was a blur of passive-aggressive comments and accidental intrusions. My mother started bringing interior designers into my living room while I was on business calls, pointing at my minimalist decor and sighing about how drab it would look for the bride's family. They weren't just asking for the space anymore. They were colonizing it. He walked into my kitchen one morning, helping himself to my coffee as if he owned the place. He didn't even look at me. He just started measuring the wall for a temporary bar he wanted to install for his groomsmen. "Leo, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice tight. "Just planning, Lily. Mom said you were being difficult, but I told her you'd come around. It's my wedding, sis. My one big moment. You can sleep in your old room with the floral wallpaper for a few weeks. It's nostalgic, right?" He laughed, a sound that lacked any genuine warmth. It's not about nostalgia, Leo. It's about the fact that I have a contract with a corporate retreat group for that week. If I cancel, I pay a massive penalty and my rating on the booking platforms drops to 0. I lose everything I've built this year. Leo shrugged dismissively. Dad said he'd cover the little fees. Just stop making everything about money. It's so tacky. The irony was stifling. These were the people who hadn't worked a real job in a decade, living off the dividends of the family trust, telling me, the only one running a literal business, that I was being tacky about money. By Wednesday, the pressure turned into a full-scale siege. My father had the locks changed on the front gate of the estate, giving the code to the wedding planners, but forgetting to update mine. I spent 40 minutes sitting in my car at the entrance of my own home, fuming, while the security guard looked at me with pity. "Orders from your father, Miss Lily," he whispered. "He said the estate is under private event management now." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply pulled my car over and called the one person who knew exactly how my father operated. My grandfather's voice came through the line, raspy but sharp as a razor. "They locked you out, didn't they?" He didn't even need me to tell him. "The gate, the schedule, and now they're trying to move my furniture out into the rain to make room for a champagne lounge," I replied, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. "Let them move the furniture, Lily Rose," grandfather said, and I could almost hear the smirk in his voice. "Let them get comfortable. Let them think they've won. The higher they build their house of cards, the louder the sound when I pull the bottom one out. I've just finished reviewing the original land grants from 40 years ago. Your father has a very short memory." What does that mean? It means that at the rehearsal dinner tomorrow, I'm going to remind him that he doesn't actually own a single blade of grass on that estate. He's a tenant of the trust, a trust that I still control. And Lily, I'm adding a special guest to the dinner list, my lawyer. I drove away from the gate, a strange sense of calm washing over me. My parents were so busy decorating a stage for their social climbing that they hadn't noticed the floorboards were rotting underneath them. That night, I stayed at a small inn nearby. I didn't fight them for my bed. I didn't argue about the champagne lounge. I just waited. I watched the social media posts from the Lilycom Stories accounts. My followers were sending so much love for the sneak peeks of the guest house I had shared earlier. They had no idea that the private villa they were admiring was currently being stripped of its soul by people who didn't know the value of a day's work. The night of the rehearsal dinner arrived with a deceptive elegance. The main estate was glowing with thousands of fairy lights, and the scent of expensive lilies, ironic given my name, filled the air. My parents were in their element, floating through the crowd of high society guests and the bride's wealthy relatives. They looked like the perfect aristocratic couple, the generous hosts of a grand dynasty. I arrived late, wearing a sharp-tailored black dress. I wasn't there as the helpful daughter tonight. I was there as a witness to an eviction. When I walked into the dining hall, the chatter dipped for a second. My mother hurried over, her eyes darting around to see if anyone noticed my lack of a festive outfit. "Lily Rose, you're finally here," she whispered, gripping my arm too hard. "Go sit at the end table with the cousins, and please try to look happy. We told the bride's mother you were thrilled to give up the guest house as a wedding gift to the couple." I pulled my arm away. "A gift? Is that what we're calling a forced seizure now?" "Don't be dramatic," she hissed. "It's one night of dinner, then the wedding tomorrow. Just play along." I took my seat, but not at the cousins' table. I walked straight to the head of the long mahogany table, pulling out the heavy chair next to the empty seat reserved for the patriarch. My father looked up, his face turning a deep shade of purple. "Lily, that seat is for me," a booming voice interrupted from the doorway. The room went dead silent. My grandfather stood there, leaning on his silver-hatted cane, flanked by a man in a boring gray suit, carrying a very thick leather briefcase. Grandfather didn't look like a man who lived in a mountain cabin. He looked like a king returning to claim a stolen throne. He sat down heavily next to me, patting my hand. The lawyer sat on his other side. "Dad," my father said, standing up and forcing a smile, "we didn't think you'd actually make the drive down. Welcome. We were just telling everyone about the wonderful accommodations Lily has provided for our guests of honor." Grandfather took a slow sip of water, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on my brother Leo, who was looking particularly smug. "Is that so?" Grandfather asked. Because according to my records, Lily Rose didn't provide anything. She was bullied out of her own home and business. And since this is a family gathering, I thought it was the perfect time to discuss the future of this hospitality. The bride's father, a stern man who clearly valued business over sentiment, cleared his throat. I was under the impression this estate was a unified family asset. That's where you were misinformed, the lawyer said, opening his briefcase. The sound of the latch clicking felt like a gunshot in the silent room. The land this estate sits on is held in a generation-skipping trust. While Mr. and Mrs. Rose have lived here, they are merely occupants at will. However, the guest house property was carved out 5 years ago and deeded directly to Lily Rose as an independent parcel in exchange for her management of the family's legacy accounts. My mother's glass hit the table with a sharp clack. That's impossible. We signed those papers. You signed papers acknowledging the transfer, grandfather said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly low growl. You just didn't read them because you were too busy spending the stipend I give you. You assumed you could take it back whenever you wanted. But you see, I don't like thieves, especially the ones I raised. He looked at my father. I heard you change the locks on my granddaughter's gate. I heard you moved her equipment into the garden. So, I've decided to simplify things. Grandfather leaned forward, his gaze locking onto my parents. As of 6 o'clock this evening, the trust has revoked your at-will occupancy of the main house. You have 48 hours to vacate. And as for the guest house, it is and always has been Lily's. If there are people inside it right now who don't have a signed rental agreement from her, they are currently trespassing. The room erupted. The bride's mother looked horrified. Leo looked like he was about to faint, and my father was gasping for air like a fish out of water. The silence that followed grandfather's declaration was so heavy you could hear the wick of the candles flickering. My mother's face transitioned from a pale white to a blotchy, panicked red. She looked at the guests, the powerful, wealthy people she had spent months trying to impress, and realized that in 10 seconds, her status had evaporated. Dad, you can't be serious, my father stammered, his voice cracking. It's Leo's wedding. You're going to humiliate us over a building? Over Lily's little hobby? Grandfather didn't even blink. He leaned back, crossing his arms over his cane. A hobby? She's the only one in this room who has actually turned a profit without a handout. And as for humiliation, you did that to yourselves the moment you treated your daughter like a servant in her own home. The lawyer, Mr. Sterling, slid a document across the table. It wasn't the deed this time. It was a thick old parchment with a wax seal that had been broken long ago. This, Mr. Sterling announced, is the codicil to the original estate will, written by your grandmother before she passed. She knew your tendencies, Harold. He looked directly at my father. The will states that the moment any attempt was made to infringe upon the independent assets of the female heirs, specifically Lily Rose, the entire estate's management rights would immediately revert to the heir in question, in this case, Lily. My jaw dropped. I didn't even know this existed. I looked at grandfather, who gave me a tiny conspiratorial wink. Which means, grandfather added, Lily doesn't just own the guest house. As of tonight, she is the trustee of the entire estate. Your occupancy at will isn't being revoked by me. It's being revoked by her. All eyes turned to me. My brother Leo looked like his entire world had collapsed. His bride-to-be was already whispering furiously to her parents, likely wondering if marrying into a family that was being evicted was a good career move. Lily, sweetie, my mother said, her voice trembling as she tried to reclaim her fake sweetness. You wouldn't actually kick your own parents out, would you? Think of the scandal. Think of your brother's special day. I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to please her. I didn't feel that familiar, crushing guilt. I felt the weight of the keys in my pocket, the keys they had tried to take from me. You didn't think about the scandal when you locked me out of the gate, I said, my voice steady and cold. You didn't think about my special day when I was working 18-hour shifts to build my business while you were picking out curtains for a house you didn't own. You wanted a performance for the wedding? Well, here's the finale. I turned to Mr. Sterling. What happens to the guests currently in the guest house? They have until midnight to move their luggage to a hotel, the lawyer replied, or they can pay your standard nightly rate, tripled, for the inconvenience of the short notice. The proceeds, of course, go to you." The bride's father stood up, his face grim. "We'll be moving to the plaza in town. I don't care for family drama, and I certainly don't care for being used as pawns in a property dispute." As the guests began to shuffle out in a state of confused shock, Leo lunged toward the table. "You're ruining my life, Lily. This wedding cost a fortune." "No, Leo," I said, standing up to meet his gaze. "You and Dad spent a fortune you didn't have, on a lifestyle you didn't earn. The wedding can still happen, but it won't be on this estate, and it certainly won't be on my dime." Grandfather stood up, his presence filling the room. "The party is over. Harold, Martha, get packing. You've had a free ride for 20 years. It's time you learned what it's like to pay rent." The morning of the wedding didn't start with the sound of celebratory bells. It started with the sound of packing tape and heavy footsteps. While my parents scrambled to shove 20 years of entitlement into cardboard boxes, I was back in my guest house. The guests of honor had fled to the city in the middle of the night, leaving behind half-empty champagne bottles and a mess that my parents would now be paying a professional crew to clean. I sat on my porch, sipping a coffee, watching the rental trucks pull up to the main house. It was poetic. Leo came running across the lawn, his tuxedo shirt unbuttoned, looking like he hadn't slept a second. "Lily, please, the catering trucks are being turned away at the gate. They say the owner hasn't authorized the event. You have to let them in. The ceremony starts in 4 hours." I set my cup down slowly. "The owner hasn't authorized it, Leo, because the owner is currently calculating the damages done to the guest house flooring and the loss of revenue from the bookings Mom forced me to cancel. I'll pay you back, I swear," he yelled, his voice cracking. "With what money, Leo? The trust is frozen. Dad's accounts are under audit by Grandfather's team. You've been living on a fantasy." And today, reality hit. Behind him, our mother emerged from the main house, clutching a designer handbag as if it were a life raft. She looked aged, the mask of high society perfection finally shattered. She didn't scream this time. She looked at me with a hollow kind of desperation. "Lily Rose, if you do this, there is no coming back. You will be the girl who ruined her brother's wedding. Is that the legacy you want?" "No, Mom," I replied, standing up. "My legacy is the Lily Calm Stories brand. My legacy is the house I built with my own hands. Your legacy is trying to steal from your daughter to impress people who couldn't even remember your last name this morning. I'm not ruining the wedding. I'm just not hosting it." I checked my watch. "The gate stays closed. If you want to get married, I suggest you find a public park or a very fast courthouse, but you are officially trespassing on my place of business." By noon, the estate was a ghost town. The florist had reclaimed the expensive arches, the caterers had packed up the lobsters, and the guests had all received a mass text from the bride's family announcing the unfortunate postponement of the nuptials. My parents were gone. They had moved into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment that Grandfather owned in a much less prestigious part of the city. He told them he'd pay the first 3 months of rent, but after that, my father, for the first time in his life, would need to find a job. As the sun began to set over the valley, the silence was finally peaceful again. No designers, no demands, no greedy family members. Just me and the house I had fought for. I heard a slow car pull up the drive. It was Grandfather's vintage sedan. He stepped out, looked at the empty main house, and then at me. "Quiet, isn't it?" he said, walking up the steps to join me on the porch. "It's perfect," I said. "They're calling me a tyrant in the city," he chuckled, leaning on his cane. "And they're calling you a heartless daughter. How does it feel?" I looked out at the rolling hills of Peshawar, the air crisp and clear. "It feels like I can finally breathe, Grandfather. It feels like I'm finally home." He nodded. "Good, because tomorrow we start the paperwork. I'm turning the entire estate over to you. The main house, the orchards, all of it. I'm retiring to the mountains for good. Just promise me one thing, Lily Rose. Anything. Never let them back through that gate. Not even for a cup of sugar." I smiled, watching the stars begin to poke through the twilight. "The locks have already been changed, Grandfather. And this time, I'm the only one with the code. If you found out your family was keeping a secret like this from you, would you take the inheritance or walk away entirely?" If you enjoyed this story of justice and family secrets, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to Lily Calm Stories for more.